The room is tense. One man leans forward, loud, animated, desperate to be heard. He's speaking in paragraphs, drowning in his own voice. Across from him, another man sits still, calm, unmoved. He says nothing, and yet everyone in the room is watching him. Not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't. That's the paradox no one teaches you. The moment you speak, you reveal. The moment you stay silent, you control. You were taught to chase the kind of intelligence that shines, degrees, charisma, fast-talking brilliance. But the kind that truly dominates, it never announces itself. It listens, it watches, and while everyone else performs, it plans. Machiavelli didn't admire the genius who dazzled. He admired the strategist who disappeared until the moment he struck. That's the mind you're about to build. Not reactive, not loud, but dangerously observant. Cold, precise, unreadable, because power, true power, isn't shown. It's felt, and by the time they feel it, it's already too late. You think you're being ignored, but someone is already 5 moves ahead of you, watching. It doesn't start with rage. It starts with silence. You don't wake up one day deciding to become dangerous. It happens slowly, the moment you stop trying to be understood. The moment you watch someone lie to your face, and instead of reacting, you remember. Dark intelligence is not learned. It's awakened. It begins in the corners of the room, in the quiet places most people ignore. You start to notice things. Why do they flinch when questioned? Why do they talk faster when they're nervous? Why do they say, "just kidding," when they mean the opposite? You begin to study people the way a wolf studies a herd. Not for charm, not for connection, but for pattern. It's in that moment, the moment you choose observation over explanation, that the old self begins to dissolve. The version of you that wanted to be liked, to be seen, to be understood, starts to go quiet. Because the truly dangerous mind isn't emotional. It's calibrated, detached, not numb, just no longer ruled by the impulse to react. When you no longer trust emotion as guidance, your perception sharpens like a weapon. You stop seeing people for what they say and start seeing them for what they reveal. You watch how they avoid silence, how they overcompensate, how they betray themselves just to feel in control. And slowly, you begin to understand that power doesn't begin with action. It begins with stillness. Stillness makes people reveal themselves. Stillness pressures the insecure. Stillness unsettles the liar. And in your stillness, you begin to change. Your emotions don't vanish. They become data. Your anger becomes pattern recognition. Your sadness becomes memory recall. Your fear becomes foresight. Where others feel overwhelmed, you remain cold. Where others justify, you calculate. Machiavelli didn't romanticize the emotional man. He feared him because emotional men are predictable. They break when tested. They scream when threatened. They chase when abandoned. The fox survives, Machiavelli wrote, because he knows when to hide his claws. You're learning to be the fox, unseen, quiet, surgical. The first phase of dark intelligence is not manipulation. It's clarity. The ability to sit in discomfort without the need to fix it. To see betrayal coming and not flinch. To walk into a room full of noise and remain undisturbed. Because when your mind turns cold, you don't lose your humanity. You reclaim it from the chaos of emotional addiction. And in that stillness, the world begins to make sense. Not because people are honest, but because they're consistent in their flaws. And once you learn to read those flaws like a language, you never fear betrayal again. You anticipate it. This is the birth of dark intelligence. Not in brilliance, not in rage, but in the moment you stop looking outward for answers and start watching everything. A dangerous mind isn't born in brilliance. It's born in repetition. Not the repetition of facts or formulas, but of human behavior. It doesn't matter how high your IQ is if you can't read a room. What makes a person dangerous isn't raw intelligence. It's pattern recognition. Most people confess by accident. You just have to know what silence sounds like. Every betrayal is preceded by hesitation. Every lie is coded in over-explanation. Every weak mind gives itself away if you know what to look for. This is where the shift begins. You stop asking, "What did they say?" and start asking, "What did they avoid saying?" You watch the way someone's eye twitches when you mention a name. You catch the pause before they answer. You hear how the voice softens when insecurity enters the room. Because once you start seeing the patterns, You realize people are predictable, especially when they think you're not watching. You start tracking contradictions. The friend who preaches loyalty but gossips constantly. The leader who praises humility but demands applause. The lover who says, "I'm fine," but shifts their tone every time you step away. The average mind reacts to these moments. The dangerous mind remembers. You don't confront, you observe. You log every inconsistency, every micro-confession, every invisible twitch in the performance. And with time, you no longer see people, you see code. Emotionally reactive people become walking equations. Insecurity plus attention equals manipulation. Charm plus overtalking equals hidden motive. Kindness plus inconsistency equals calculated bait. You begin to listen between the words. You notice what didn't get answered. You sense the discomfort behind every overconfident laugh. Because most people aren't hiding the truth, they're leaking it. And when you combine that with patience, you no longer guess who someone is. You know, perception, Machiavelli would argue, is the battlefield of the elite. Power belongs to the man who sees clearly, not the one who performs loudly. This is why the dangerously intelligent don't rush to impress. They don't reveal their story first. They don't explain their values up front. Because the moment you perform, you lose control of the frame. And the one who watches holds the power. Dark intelligence isn't about what you say. It's about how much you learn before you ever speak. And here's the truth. Most people will never notice you're watching. They'll talk endlessly to prove they're smart, to prove they're good. But every sentence is data. Every overshare is leverage. Every emotional tell becomes a pressure point you'll use if needed. That's the difference. Genius shines, but dark intelligence waits. It doesn't need the spotlight. It needs the shadows, because that's where the patterns hide. And the one who sees them rules everything. True power isn't loud. It doesn't wear a title. It doesn't beg for obedience. It simply is. The most dangerous minds don't need authority to control a room. They do it through influence that feels invisible. He who builds the idea in another's mind becomes their master. Machiavelli, this is the essence of dark intelligence. Influence without visible effort. Control without resistance. The art of conversational dominance starts with this. People don't respond to logic. They respond to how you make them feel about what they already believe. That's your entry point and your weapon. You don't push, you pull. You guide the conversation like a river, never forcing it, but always steering it. How? 1. Ask surgical questions, not to gather information, but to shape self-disclosure. What makes you say that? How long have you felt this way? And then what happened? These aren't innocent. They disarm, they soften the ego, and most importantly, they make people believe the insight was their own. The mind resists pressure, but it embraces ownership. And when someone feels they reached a conclusion, they defend it, even if you planted it. 2. Use silence as psychological pressure. Most people speak to fill silence. You let silence fill them. You pause one beat longer than expected. You stare a fraction deeper than comfort allows. You respond, not with explanation, but with stillness. Why? Because silence triggers reflection. It amplifies doubt. It exposes guilt without a single word. And the longer you wait, the more power you hold. 3. Mirror, then redirect. People trust what feels familiar. Mirror their emotional tone, not as mimicry, but as rapport building. Match their energy. If they speak softly, lower your voice. If they're intense, sharpen your gaze. And once they feel understood, pivot. Shift the emotional current by inserting your energy slightly calmer, slightly clearer, slightly more grounded. They'll follow you, not because you demanded it, but because you made resonance feel safe. This is where psychological control reveals its brilliance. You don't overpower anyone. You lead them to surrender willingly. You don't impose beliefs. You engineer alignment. Machiavelli understood. The clever ruler lets others arrive at conclusions he whispered into their minds days before. You're not arguing. You're architecting. Most people debate. The dangerously intelligent design belief structures. They walk into a room and reshape the atmosphere, not by force, but by how others adjust around them. They observe long enough to know who craves validation, who hides fear beneath jokes, who pretends to lead, but secretly follows, and then they subtly rearrange the dynamics. Praise the insecure. Ask the dominant for their opinion, then reframe it. Let silence press on the needy until they unravel. Because at the highest level of power, you're not manipulating people. You're letting their own psychology do the work. This is the new law. If they think it's their idea, they will follow it blindly, even if you authored it, especially if you never take credit. That's the Machiavellian edge, the power not of force, but of undetected authorship. And once you master that, you stop needing control, because you're the structure they move inside of. You don't need to speak to control a room. You don't need to act to shift energy. You just need to be unreadable, because the moment people can't predict you, they start fearing you. Why mystery is power? Most people reveal themselves by reflex. They explain too quickly, laugh too loudly, correct too defensively. But you pause, you observe, you choose when to engage, and more importantly, when not to. Your stillness becomes pressure, your silence becomes structure, and your unpredictability, that becomes strategy. Unpredictability isn't chaos. It's control through disorientation. You don't cause panic, you cause uncertainty. And uncertainty is the first ingredient of power. Mastering the aura, silence, stillness, subtle movement. 1. Speak less. Say more. Let your presence feel deliberate. Every word you say should feel chosen, not spilled. Use measure pauses. Let your silence stretch just beyond comfort. Hold eye contact just 1 second longer than expected. People will lean in, not because they're drawn to what you say, but because they fear what you might say next. 2. Use your body like a weapon. Posture upright, chin slightly elevated, movement slow, purposeful. Never fidget, never rush. Stillness communicates certainty, and certainty, especially when you say nothing, becomes intimidation wrapped in grace. Your absence is punishment. People who offend you expect an argument. They expect confrontation. They expect drama, but you offer them none. You vanish. You go silent. You give them the most terrifying response imaginable: nothing. That vacuum forces reflection. They wonder, did I say something wrong? Did they see through me? Are they planning something? Silence is not the absence of noise. It's the presence of calculation. You become the question they can't answer. And that unease makes people shift their behavior around you. Not because you told them to, but because they can feel your standards without words. Ambiguity. The hidden armor. Say less about what you want. Say even less about what hurts you. Let your reactions be slow and measured. If they think they've figured you out, change tone. If they think you're distant, show warmth. If they think you're impressed, offer no reaction. The goal isn't to confuse. It's to interrupt their ability to categorize you. And once people can't label you, they can't contain you. The unreadable man is dangerous not because he's hiding something, but because no one knows what he's capable of. He holds the power of the undefined threat, quiet enough to be underestimated, sharp enough to shatter false confidence, absent enough to become unforgettable. This is the paradox of dark presence. You become the center of attention by not needing any. You don't demand fear. You become a question they're too afraid to answer. There's a way to speak that bends reality, not with volume, not with charisma, but with precision. Why most people talk themselves out of power? The world is noisy. People speak to be liked, to fill silence, to prove something. But every unnecessary word is a leak of power. The dangerously intelligent know. Speech is not for connection. Speech is for control. He who explains submits. He who defines reality becomes the authority. The first rule: speak less than you know. Never explain your motives. Never correct their assumptions. Let your words create tension, not closure. Confusion is leverage, because when people aren't sure what you meant, they'll spend hours interpreting. And the longer they wonder, the deeper your presence embeds in their mind. The weaponization of tone, timing, and silence. 1. Use pauses like traps. Pause mid-sentence. Let the silence feel uncomfortable. They'll fill it with over-explaining, oversharing, overreacting. Your pause is a mirror. They reveal themselves inside it. 2. Speak soft. Strike sharp. Never raise your voice. Lower it. Say the uncomfortable truth as if it were nothing. Say the compliment as if it were an afterthought. The more emotionally flat you deliver impact, the more psychological damage it leaves. A calm insult cuts deeper than a loud threat. Tactical phrases that shift entire narratives. That's one way to see it. Interesting choice. You seem certain. That's rare these days. I wouldn't have gone that route, but I'm watching. Each of these lines does one thing: plant a splinter. They destabilize the other person's confidence without you ever being direct. It's not about attacking people. It's about letting them question themselves in your presence. Reframing reality in conversations. You don't argue the facts. You shift the frame. They say, "We didn't respond to my message." You reply, "Time has to be earned." They ask, "Are you angry?" You answer, "Do you think I waste emotions on things I've already decided?" This is how you redefine the ground you stand on. You don't play defense. You write the rules of engagement. Speak with intent, or don't speak at all. Every time you open your mouth, you're telling the world how much control you have. Let them talk too much. Let them defend, explain, apologize. You say just enough to be remembered, and never enough to be understood completely. Strategic speech isn't clever phrasing. It's psychological warfare. You don't speak to be heard. You speak to make them feel seen by someone they can't read. Most people think relationships are built on love, loyalty, and trust. But when dark intelligence enters the room, relationships become power structures, negotiations disguised as affection. This is the real battleground. Not politics, not business, but between two people who claim to care for each other. Why most people lose themselves in relationships? Because they give too much, too fast, for free. They surrender leverage through guilt, oversharing, neediness, emotional outbursts. They confuse closeness with control and vulnerability with obligation. But Machiavelli knew better. Men are driven by two impulses, love or fear. But the master uses neither. He uses control, emotional sovereignty. The cold advantage to win here, you must first become emotionally untouchable. Not because you don't feel, but because you don't bleed in front of those who might use it. When they try to test you, you don't argue. You vanish. Affection won't buy access. Proximity is earned through strategy, not sentiment. This silence, this distance, it rewires the game. The art of withholding validation, this is how you shift the power dynamic. Do not praise effort. Praise results. Do not reward access. Reward discipline. Do not reassure. Let the insecurity work for you. When someone chases your approval, you don't give it. You make them prove they can hold it. Most people give love to feel safe. You give silence to see who earns your clarity. Emotional traps to avoid over-explaining your feelings. You're handing them a map to manipulate you. Begging to be understood, you frame yourself as less valuable. Apologizing for your standards, you make your boundaries negotiable. Instead, let your absence answer their disrespect. Let your silence answer their drama. Let your standards answer their confusion. Power in relationships isn't taken. It's trained. You're not controlling people. You're training them in how to treat you. Every reaction is a lesson. Every boundary is an announcement. You don't need to punish anyone. You just make them feel what life is like without your energy. And that withdrawal is more devastating than any speech. Master the vanish, they yell. You don't respond. They demand closure. You leave the page blank, because when you react, you hand them your center. When you withdraw, you force them to chase their own reflection in your silence. This isn't cruelty, it's design. Why Machiavelli would call you dangerous? Because you feel, but you don't expose. You care, but never crave. You connect, but only from strength, never emptiness. You're not cold, you're calculated. You know the rules they don't even realize they're playing by. And that is why you win. Not by love, not by fear, but by standing so still, they confuse your silence for distance, while you're already 10 steps ahead, rewriting the rules of the bond. That's emotional warfare. And now, you don't fight it, you shape it. What happens when you no longer need recognition? When praise feels irrelevant? When apology no longer moves you? When approval is optional, not required? You become untouchable. You don't react. You redirect. This is the first sign of final form intelligence. You don't react because you already saw it coming. Insults? Predictable. Betrayals? Anticipated. Validation games? Too transparent to bother decoding. You don't flinch, you record. You don't defend, you design. You don't confront, you remove. You've stopped explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Not out of bitterness, but out of efficiency. Your silence isn't emptiness. It's design. They say you've changed. You're distant now. You're colder, but they're wrong. You're not colder, you're calibrated. You're not silent, you're calculating. You're not gone, you're in the walls. This is architect-level detachment. You still feel. You just no longer signal every emotion like a public broadcast. They won't fear your anger. They'll fear your absence. And that's where the power lives. Presence that bends the room. You don't need to enter a space loud. You let the silence announce you. No introductions, no performances, just stillness that shifts the rhythm. Why? Because when people can't read you, they project their fears onto you. And those projections are always more terrifying than the truth. You become a mirror too clean to lie to. They flinch, Not because you threaten, but because you make them feel seen in ways they can't handle. The ghost in the system mindset, you're no longer part of the visible structure. You become infrastructure. Others operate inside the system. You become a glitch. You appear when it's strategic. You vanish when they expect you to fight. You offer no explanation, no rebuttal, no pattern to follow. And that unpredictability becomes a virus in their minds, occupying mental space long after you've gone quiet. What you've outgrown, explaining your standards, debating with emotion-driven minds, repeating your worth, chasing people who only hear noise, not signal you are no longer playing their game. You are building your own rules, in silence, with precision, without fingerprints. The price of power is that you are misunderstood. You don't move for attention. You don't perform for belonging. You don't reveal for validation. This unnerves people. It shakes them, because in a world addicted to noise, your silence feels like a judgment they can't escape. But you don't need them to understand. Your goal is never their comfort. It's your clarity. Machiavelli's final lesson: true power doesn't roar. It lingers in the silence others can't explain. You don't need a crown. You don't need applause. You don't even need to be remembered, because you've built systems, alliances, perceptions in the dark, and now they run on their own. You're not chasing legacy. You're designing consequence. Not revenge, not dominance, just control. Perfectly silent. You become the shadow behind the spotlight. The pause in conversation that shifts the mood. The unseen architect of outcomes that no one traces back to you. And in that space, you don't just win. You disappear, and they never even saw it coming. You don't just watch. You execute. This week, stop reacting. Watch. Use silence as your weapon. Use unpredictability as your shield. Speak less. Influence more. If this video cracked open a side of you you've buried, don't say anything. Just move differently. And if you're ready to walk into every room with a presence no one can touch, subscribe. Not for entertainment, but for your evolution. Because after this, you don't chase power. You become it.